Felix, you were talking a little bit about liberal Zionism and the liberal Zionists of yore, and where are they now? I'd just like to take a second to talk a little bit about this New York Times editorial board piece that was one of the most nauseating things I've ever read, titled "Who Killed Journalist Shireen Abu Akleh?" And the fact that they're even asking that question is pretty fucking nauseating. They're just we've got to get to the bottom of this. We've got to figure it out.
If you remember, like the Khashoggi shit, I mean, line those up side by side.
It says here, in her 25 years as a journalist for Al Jazeera, Shireen Abu Akleh covered many clashes between Israelis and Palestinians. So when she went to the occupied West Bank city of Jenin in the early morning of May 11th to cover an Israeli army operation in a refugee camp, she took all the requisite precautions. She wore a helmet and blue body armor marked press in large letters. She stood near the entrance of the refugee camp with a group of other journalists in her presence, and her presence was immediately noticed. She was so well known among Arabic-speaking audiences that a crowd gathered to watch her work. In the course of their reporting, however, the journalist came under fire. Ms. Abu Akleh, an American citizen, was killed by a bullet to the head. Another journalist, Ali Samoudi, who was also wearing a flak jacket marked press, was shot in the back and survived. More than 3 weeks have passed since Ms. Abu Akleh was killed. Yet, despite a surge of international outrage and calls by, among others, the U.S. State Department, Israeli human rights organizations, scholars, and members of civil society for a thorough investigation of her death and of the allegations that she was killed because she was a journalist, no formal, impartial outside inquiry has been started. The world still knows very little about who is responsible for her death. Ms. Abu Akleh's family, her colleagues, and all who care about freedom of the press as a pillar of democracy deserve far more. So, I mean, I'm just trying to imagine like the fucking like what are the fucking like the straitjackets that they have to wear at the New York Times editorial board to write a paragraph that says like we still know very little about who killed her, because I mean like there's plenty of evidence, and in fact the op-ed even mentions the CNN report, not exactly Al Jazeera, that analyzed the video and said that she was not just killed by the Israelis but killed on purpose by the Israeli snipers.
Yeah, it is pretty insane, the New York Times Israel-Palestine stuff, because it's like New York Times is obviously like an ideological organ, as is like any piece of the American press, right? But you can rely, at least for cynical reasons, some degree of fake impartiality and kind of making it look like everything's above board. But when it comes to Israel-Palestine, it's like reading David Horowitz's blog. It's fucking insane.
Well, I mean, like the interesting thing about this editorial is that it lays out like fairly clearly who killed her and the conditions that gave rise to it, but like they do everything but say the obvious. Like it's like the person who wrote this editorial, or whoever commissioned it, or whoever was involved in it, like they all know the answer to this question, and they give the reader like every piece of evidence that would be like required to draw the conclusion that everyone else has, but they just don't say it. And like they still parse it in this. And like I said, like, oh, I guess we need an independent commission, but like, you know, an independent commission is like, oh, like that won't be seen as legitimate by the Israelis or the Palestinians. So like, for instance, listen to this. It says, the early response to the killing has been alarming. 2 days after her death, the results of 2 preliminary investigations were announced. The Palestinian Authority charged that Miss Abu Akleh, 51, had been targeted by Israeli soldiers. The Israeli military, for its part, said there was always a risk of non-combatants being hit during an armed clash, and said that the fatal shot may have come from an indiscriminate Palestinian gunfire or an Israeli sniper. On the day that she was shot, a spokesman for the Israeli military implied that journalists were legitimate targets. The Times of Israel reports that the spokesman told the army radio that Ms. Abu Akleh was filming and working for a media outlet amidst armed Palestinians. They're armed with cameras, if you'll permit me to say so. So they're basically quoting the Israeli government as just saying, like, yeah, like journalists are legitimate targets, and we shot her because she was with a press organization that's hostile to the Israeli occupation. But then, like, it says, but Israelis should care more about what happened to Ms. Abu Akleh. Democracies require a free press as a prerequisite for informed self-governments. Israel needs to ensure the safety of journalists in the country and in areas that it occupies to ensure the safety of its own democracy. Do you think they give a shit about what is this ass covering here? They're telling you exactly what happened, but refusing to state the obvious.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting, right? Because when this happened, it seemed pretty. The playbook of people like the New York Times seemed pretty obvious, right? It's to obfuscate and create a fog of like, oh well, this is consistent with guns that Israel uses, but also the Palestinians could get those guns, and like maybe it's blah blah blah. We don't know. We have to form a committee, but the committee might be disapproved by Israel. Blah blah blah. That would make sense to do in like 2006. But now, when Israel is just pretty much openly like, yeah, we killed her. We killed her. What are you going to do about it? You kind of wonder what the point of them even doing this is.
Like I said, they reference the CNN report where it says here CNN and other news organizations have begun their own investigations. After reviewing video footage, witnesses' accounts, and audio forensic analysis of the gunshots, CNN reported that evidence suggested that Abu Akleh was shot dead in a targeted attack by Israeli forces. The witnesses and videos, it said, provided new evidence that there was no active combat nor any Palestinian militants near Abu Akleh in the moments leading up to her death. I mean, okay, CNN did that. I mean, like, presumably the New York Times could do their own investigation into this and draw their own conclusions. But they're just like, okay, well, that's just what CNN says. Israel reacted sharply. In an address to the World Economic Forum in Davos on May 25th, President Isaac Herzog of Israel rejected the report, saying it was based on fake facts. So it just goes on, and then the last graph of it says the best tribute to her life and work would be to make sure that her death does not vanish in the fog of hatred and recrimination, but serves to guarantee the safety of all journalists who seek to pierce that fog. So it's like they basically are saying that the Israeli military like intentionally assassinated this journalist, and the response to it is hope that doesn't happen again. Let's all dedicate ourselves to supporting her legacy by making sure this doesn't happen again.
But also,
yeah,
but also don't make it disappear in a fog of hatred. Which I guess, I mean, if they're saying what I think they're saying, that is like one of the most repulsive things I've heard a mainstream media organ say with regards to Israel and Palestine. Just like it's saying don't get too mad about this, or you're just as bad as whoever killed her. We don't know.
Yeah, it's just the fog of war, the fog of hatred. Like let's just we can't allow this like assassination of a journalist. Let's not get too mad at whoever did it, but let's just make sure who did it doesn't happen again.
Well, yeah, it's harder.
We need to find out who did it, but we may never find out. So like let's just not let it devolve into another bitter round of recriminations.
Well, I mean, it's harder than ever to establish parity for kind of bullshit objectivity in American media. It's harder to establish parity between Israel and Palestine. It always was kind of hard. The difference between rocks and small arms and fucking tanks and airstrikes. But it's especially hard now, given that the Israeli treatment of so many Palestinian populations is, I mean, it is like if the Third Reich had modern technology. It is, they're doing everything you could to sort of beat down and cut down the birth rates of and mentally eviscerate a hated population. I guess the way that they find parity with that is it's twofold. It's like the anti-Semitism stuff, which is like, I think serves the purpose of like, okay, well, if we're mentally obliterating Palestinians and trying to keep down their birth rates and literally like neutering people and spraying them with chemicals and keeping them in an open air prison and doing everything we possibly can to make them feel like animals. Well, you're also doing that to me by, othering me in spaces. Yeah, that's the parody they can create there. But here, I guess it's a new one, which is like we're doing all that, and we also just fucking gunned down this journalist in front of everyone. But if you don't stoop to our level, I guess.
Yeah. Don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel like
it's just tough. It's tough. I mean, the New York Times' role here reminds me of like when a dog gets spayed or neutered and they still hump things. you're shooting blanks. Your job isn't really needed here, but you're still doing the thing you remember you had to do.